Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Doughty from Capital Region BOCES, and I'm joined by a couple of colleagues here who I'll let introduce themselves.
I'm Sharon Swain. Hello.
Hi, I'm Gina Grasso.
And the purpose of this webinar is really to show you what we did with a group of about, I would say, 400-ish teachers in a regional professional learning experience around unpacking the next generation standards. So the way this went, and all these materials will be accessible in the Schoology class where this ends up. And what we did, this was a follow-up from an experience that the same group of teachers, many of the same teachers, had earlier during the school year in the fall. And what we did occurred later in the fall. And this was kind of a follow-up to that. And I can show you the objectives that we identified for this part of it. And really, part of it was to tell people about our statewide standards work, and also to give people some exposure to the curriculum, standards-based curriculum development model that we're using, and then also to really try to build some capacity within these school districts for teachers to work with one another around standards and developing curriculum. So we started the morning in the auditorium with everybody and did some introductions. It was at that point that I talked about the statewide partnership, and we'll make the morning part of it available so that people can watch that too to get the larger context. And then the last thing I did was I took folks through an example related to deconstructing standards that had to do with driving, because one of the things that we wanted to do was give everybody a common experience that was kind of content agnostic, and then just to show how to break down a standard into the knowledge, skills, and understandings that students would need to demonstrate in order to show that they met the standard. So from there, then we, later in the morning, we gave folks a break, and then we had them break into groups. So maybe Gina or Sharon, do you want to talk about how we grouped folks?
Sure. So the groups were split up by ELA, grade levels K1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the high school group, same thing with the math. And the special ed were allowed to go to any group that made sense for them. CTE was in its own group, LOC was in its own group, the librarians went together, and foreign language was the other.
Yep. Yeah, languages other than English were their own group. And one of the things that we actually got feedback on was that special ed folks wanted to be in their own group the next time we brought people together. So I think they often get just sort of, oh, go wherever. And there was definitely a feeling when several of them that stopped afterwards to say, yeah, we have some stuff that we could work on just ourselves related to the standards work. So you get into the breakout rooms and spend a little bit of time getting to know one another. And how did that go? Is that fine?
That was great. People were sharing information, sharing emails, and so that they could spend some time prior to really working on the curriculum, really getting to know each other and having a better idea of where each person's coming from.
And do you want to talk a little bit about why we picked those particular questions? Because, I mean, certainly the where do you teach, your name, how long have you been teaching, but the favorite and least favorite lessons, what was the point of that?
So when Gina and I were working on this, we were thinking about asking about their best or favorite lesson, their worst or least favorite lesson, really getting people to understand and think about what makes a lesson work, what doesn't, what a student outcome is that, what makes a lesson, is it not. But it was interesting because in the group that I was in of about 40 people, really nobody talked about a lesson. They talked about a subject they liked teaching, a subject they didn't like teaching, and it was very interesting to see that they weren't thinking at the level of actual lesson or what the students were learning at that point.
And even though this work is centered around the standards themselves, we also thought this was a good entry point for folks to get them talking about teaching and learning, and then to move into the next step. So from there, we just kind of reviewed the purpose from before, and then you want to talk a little bit about what happened next?
Sure. So we broke up into our groups, and everybody got their hands on the standards, which was really great because they really were excited to have the standards in their hand and take some time to look through them. And it was really interesting to walk around and hear the conversation, getting an idea about where people are, who was at the last training, who wasn't at the last training, why people may have missed certain things. So it was an interesting point that people were bringing up of how we ensure that when people miss meetings, how they catch up and aren't left behind. So having a video like this, they were excited to know that this is a possibility. And really at this point, it was just taking a look at the standards before we broke up for lunch and getting an idea of what, if they were to look at a lesson for a particular standard, what that might look like without giving them a whole lot of direction yet, just really thinking it through.
So maybe now's a good time to look at some of the slides. So the slides will also make available to folks. These were the slides that we used. So there was the getting to know you activity with the questions, then reviewing the work, certainly, and like you mentioned, Sharon, this idea of what happened last time. And we've included with the slides just some explanatory notes about what the facilitators were doing, because what we did, we didn't mention this at the beginning, was we asked districts to identify teachers who could help us with facilitating these different groups. And then we provided some training to them around what they were going to do in those small groups. And then these materials came as a support to those folks who were in there. And then let's talk about what we did here.
Gina, do you want to talk to this? Because you did a great job of picking the standard that our group worked through.
Sure. So from there, it was sort of left up to the facilitator to choose a standard. K through 6, it was within ELA, and then in the upper levels in high school, it was within their content. And so in the room that was grades 2 and 3, what we did was we chose the same ELA standard from in 2nd grade and in 3rd grade. So the standard around developing main idea and theme, just because that is a major standard, but additionally, you can see the development across those 2 years. So the facilitator identified that standard, but then pushed the room to read through it in their paper and then think more deeply about what did that standard mean, and we began to look at it within the knowledge, skills, and understanding.
And I think it's important to note, too, that the teachers that participated as facilitators did a great job, but I think they went into it a little bit nervous because a lot of them felt like they had to have all the answers. But we were really trying to get them to the place where, no, they're just facilitating a conversation and learning along with everybody else. And I think as I was walking around and visiting the different rooms, I know, Sharon, you were in one of them, that seems to work, right?
Yeah, there was definitely teachers who wanted the answer key. They weren't happy with the situation, but the conversation really was, we are in the process of building our knowledge right now, and that's important to be where we are, and the frustration is not a bad thing. It's a good thing because it's really challenging people to think more deeply about what we're looking at. So it was informative to everybody. And like Gina said, looking at the 2 standards across grade levels was great, because having 2nd and 3rd grade together, they really started to understand how the standards build on each other, and they really started to value understanding the standards below at their grade level and above, and building on the knowledge that the kids should come in with. And if they haven't, they know what they've missed. Yeah,
good. So then it was at this point that we had them think about the lesson or a lesson, and then what would the students be doing, what would mastery look like, and then moved into using this standards deconstruction tool. So a lot of conversation around what are we actually doing to standards here? Are we deconstructing them? Are we unpacking them? Are we unwrapping them? And I guess we kind of landed on the fact it doesn't really matter. We're just learning about them at a deeper level, so because call it whatever you want. But the point here, this was the same format that I used as the example for the driving example in the morning, where we identify the standard and then have folks go through what do students need to know, what do they have to do in terms of skills, and then what do they have to understand in order to demonstrate that they have mastered a particular standard or meta standard. And this is one of those things where, and I tried to get the point across to the large group, that this is harder than you think. And it's one of those things where you sort of, I think people feel like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, I'm fine. But when you really start digging into it and talking about it and arguing about it, there's a lot there. Anything noteworthy from the folks in the room where you were, Sharon, about this?
Yeah, there was a lot of questions where if things fit under knowledge or under skills. And that, again, was a great conversation because it became, they really need to understand the continuum, even within the standard, of what the base skills kids need to build on to know if you're actually in the knowledge or the skills area.
And then you folks did this for just one standard, or did you do it for multiple standards?
Well, we did it for the ones that Gina had mentioned for the grade 2 and grade 3. What was nice is Gina had kind of done this ahead of time, so what we did was grade 2. We tried it together, then we did show Gina's example. Then we did grade 3, and they had a much better idea of, putting vocabulary in the knowledge piece. It was nicely laid out. They really got to get a good understanding.
Did anything come up that would be helpful for folks to know if they were going to either facilitate this work or train people to facilitate this work? Anything that you thought, oh, if I'd thought about this ahead of time, it might have made things easier? Anything jump up?
The biggest piece is just knowing that it's okay not to know yet, that this is building the knowledge base, and that this is really where the people wanted the answer key. Having the example, I think the one piece, your driving example would have been helpful to have back in this slide so that it would give them a good picture. And having Gina's example to go back to was really, really useful. So I think having something already done that they could look at after the fact to get a better idea of what somebody else's perspective of what this would look like is important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then from there, Gina gets all the credit for this slide, your own adventure slide. And I have to move your pictures out of the way here a little bit so folks can see the spectacular artwork of the sort of the next generation standards pointing at, right, the Common Core standards. So nice job on that one, Gina. So then you had folks choose a math standard. This was in the for K6, right? So they did an ELA and then a math one?
Yeah.
Okay. And then as you had them reflect, so we wanted to be purposeful too, that it wasn't just about the content, that it was really about helping teachers really change their mindset about the process of unpacking standards. So we were deliberate about the reflection questions that we asked. And how did this conversation go? I'm curious.
I think that they found the process challenging yet rewarding is what it sounded like. They were surprised what they did and didn't know, and they it really got them thinking about what would be helpful in the future if they really want to spend more time with their vertical teams as well as their grade level teams, really spend more time with the standards, really getting a greater understanding of how they all connect together and what the continuum really looks like. So that was, I think, in my group, really what was the biggest thing that came with it.
Well, and we had a debrief meeting with the facilitators after, and one of the things that came up was, well, we don't have time to unpack and do this knowledge, skills, and understandings for every standard. And it was at that point we were kind of like, whoa, time out. Nobody's expecting that, because that doesn't make a ton of sense. The point of this was really getting people to think about standards in terms of knowledge, skills, and understandings and practice it a few times, but really to develop that mindset versus just going through the rote work of doing all that.
Yeah, definitely there was the suggestion that we have a nice look at what our timeline, our expectations are, so that they have a better idea and are confident going back into the classroom that nobody's going to be asking them to deliver this next week.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we had lunch, and then we came back and had folks look at, and this was a test that it got, because we ended up on a 2-hour delay. So I don't know how many rooms actually were able to get to this. We actually removed it in our contingency plan, but then I did mention to the facilitators when we met in the morning that if they had time to get to it, that it was helpful. So this activity this task really was about starting to think about what aligns and what doesn't align to standards, because a lot of times teachers will plan things that are engaging tasks or activities or assessments, but that are loosely or not even closely aligned to the actual standard. So the example we used was a 5th grade ELA standard, and we had folks talk through this and had it deconstructed for them. And really it was focusing on the informational text one down here. And then did your group get to this, Sharon, or no?
We didn't. I think some other groups did though, but we did not get a chance to do it.
So I saw a couple of groups talking about it, and it generated a lot of conversation. So the standards unpacked for them, they talk about that, and then with a couple of examples that we created, having them really look at those 3 tasks, I guess, and say which one's actually aligned to the standard. And in this case, the second one really is the only one that aligns based on what the students are being asked to do in terms of noting similarities and differences. The Venn diagram one is really the only one that gets close. The other 2 are nice and really engaging for kids, but not aligned to the standard. Then the task was then to have them do the same thing. So take one of the standards that they had worked with, and then create we call it truths, or 2 truths and a lie, or I think that's what we did, right, Gina? 2 truths and 1 lie. Yeah. We wanted to focus a little more on the positive. And then the idea was to have them think about the standard and create 2 tasks that align and 1 that does not, and then share it with the larger group and have a conversation about why a task either does or does not align based on how they constructed it, based on what's in the standards and how they unpack those individual standards. And it generates a lot of conversation, which is pretty cool. And then the closing was really just going to talk about what we did for the closing, Sharon.
Right. So we were able to take turn this kind of back around on the teachers and give them a sheet of paper to think about their own process at this point, where their knowledge is, where their skills are, and where their understanding is when it comes to standards-based curriculum. And it was interesting to have them try to turn around now and say to themselves and really get the understanding that they're still building their knowledge. They're not ready to be experts at this yet, but it was a nice kind of turnaround because it gave them a different lens of thinking about their own ability and their own process.
And in terms of logistics and planning, I think when I think about how it went, it would have been nice maybe we were kind of creating this as we were working with the facilitators. So we met with 2 different groups of facilitators ahead of time. The first group, we really didn't have much of this fleshed out, and that was rough on them because it was very, very muddy at that point. By the time we got to the second group, we had made it a little bit more concrete, and I think that helped. So I think my takeaway from that is we need to have it more concrete earlier. We were bumping up against time, so that made it a little challenging for us. But really to try to make sure that the facilitators have enough time to interact with the materials and the content and ask questions, which they did over email. I think we got there. But it caused some folks, because they want to do a good job. I mean, it caused them a little bit of angst because, like we said before, they felt like they needed to have all the answers. We had chart paper and markers for them. We had copies of the standards for everybody in math and ELA, and then we made 1 copy of all of the other standards and just for the room, and then really expected people to have their own or get access to them using the internet. What else? Anything else that was kind of a logistical thing?
No, it seemed to pretty much everyone had what they needed. I think the notes that you provided to everybody was really helpful in helping them guide through. It seemed I didn't hear really any major challenges. I heard a lot of good conversation. There was a few of the groups that felt like, the CTE group, the LTE group, they did feel like they might have needed a bit more guidance on what standards to be focusing on already. And again, like we said earlier, the special ed group really felt like they wanted to be together so that they could really, there's so many standards that they have to focus on. It's hard for them just to stay in one room.
Right. And we'll find a way for them to do that next time. So the notes you were talking about, Sharon, that's in this facilitator that we'll make sure everybody has access to. And I don't know, anything else that you think people would need to know in order to do this work with their folks?
I think it went well. I think people came with what the goal was.
Great. Any parting thoughts, Gina?
I think Sharon sort of already said it, but just being okay with not having all the answers, because
right.
That's also authentic, because no one has all the answers right now. So as a facilitator, just being aware of that, but being prepared in the same sense.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, ladies, thank you so much for being willing to debrief this and for all of your work in planning and pulling this off. It was a lot of people, and hopefully this work will be helpful for other people as they continue down this road of learning about and implementing the next generation standards.